right, and the second quiz in 4.2. This is the point 4 for liberties in the courts. This section talks about a lot of court cases, so definitely look at those. I'm not going to include them in here, but definitely look at those, even if it's just briefly, skipping through it to look at the court cases, because you'll be asked questions about those. So basically you have landmark court cases. We've talked about that already before. Basically, these landmark cases, they're called landmark cases because they set a precedent, like a beginning of like, this is the way it's going to be from now on. This is the way that we're going to decide. Precedent court cases also are the kind of court cases where when a new court case that is similar to one before comes up, they say, okay, well, let's look at what set this precedent and how courts usually have ruled, because we're going to use that information to figure out how we're going to rule on this new court case. So anyways, some of these Supreme Court cases, some of the ones that you guys looked at when you were researching, when we had our assignment on these landmark cases, have basically expanded civil liberties. One famous one is the Miranda case. There was never a right that you had to have your rights read to you until that came along. So once that court case happened, they basically said, well, yeah, police officers should tell you and make sure you understand what your rights are. So that expanded our civil liberties without actually changing anything in the Bill of Rights. So the Supreme Court has, a good deal of power. So again, make sure that you look at those court cases. One specifically I'll talk about, this is the Tinker v. Des Moines court case. Basically, students wore these armbands to protest the Vietnam War at school, and they said, the school said, nope, you can't wear them. There's this whole thing. They took it to the Supreme Court because they kept fighting each other, and the Supreme Court officially decided that they can protest as long as they're not disrupting the school, okay, the day-to-day basis. So they can protest. They have the right to freedom of speech in the schools as long as it is as long as it does not disrupt education. Okay, so this was a pretty big case. Freedom of expression that people have. There's a few different types of expression, and it should be coming up here soon. Here we go. So 3 types of speech or expression. So you have pure speech, which is verbal, what you say. Speech plus, which involves actions like marches, holding signs, picketing, boycotts. So it involves actions as well. It's more than just talking about it. And then symbolic speech. It's like those armbands that you just saw. Those are symbolic. Okay. You don't have to say anything for someone to know what your position is, right? So these are 3 types of speech. They're all protected. All are included in freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And let's see, a couple more things. This will be a short video. Because in the 4th Amendment it says you have the right to not have your stuff searched and seized, that's also talking about intellectual property, and also your privacy. So like the government cannot tap your phone, and like the police, they can't just tap into your email, into your phone, unless they have a warrant. Okay, so they cannot start listening in on you unless they have a warrant. Federal government is a whole different thing, really, kind of. They honestly don't listen to the regular people. They don't. There's way too many, like, when people start to get like, oh, they're listening to us, I'm like, really? They're listening to you? Why do they care what you're saying? I mean, unless you're like saying horrible things online or like very like powerful things, you have lots of followers and you have lots of people that are like behind you and you're part of this radical group, like unless things get a little bit more intense, they're not going to be listening to you. They're not going to be checking on you because there's way too many people and they don't have the time to check on everybody. So I don't worry about that because I'm not part of any big, huge, weird group. I don't have a ton of followers, so I know they're not going to do anything to me. So they're not listening to me at all. Let's see. Last thing, and this is what I mentioned before in a different video that I was going to come back to this, so I finally am, with Freedom of religion, with the Establishment Clause that government cannot establish a religion, and the Free Exercise Clause where government cannot restrict you from establishing your religion. There are lots of cases that talk about prayers in schools. So if someone decides to pray in school, the school cannot say you can't pray, because that would be violating free exercise. If the school said, hey, so and so, can you lead us in a prayer? That is violating the Establishment Clause, because that would be as if they're supporting a specific religion. So whenever a school or any government entity, if they were to like actually endorse a prayer or say, hey, let's have a prayer, or let's do something like that follows a specific religion, that would be a violation of the Establishment Clause, because that would be like they're endorsing that religion. There are a lot of things that like basically cause these two parts of freedom of religion to clash, because on the one hand you can't like support one, on the other hand you can't restrict it. So how do you let people follow, like have their freedom of religion without feeling like you're either establishing it, or like if you say no, you can't pray, then you are not allowing the free exercise of it. But if you allow it, people can say that you're establishing it because you're allowing it. So you can see like there's that little tussle. It's really hard, guys. I feel like every single amendment, and it does talk about this in the unit, every single amendment is kind of picked apart, and it's like, well, what about this? And there's all these different angles, and it's always being interpreted differently. Every single time a new case comes up, it's going to be interpreted differently. It's definitely unique. And the reason there's so many different interpretations of these amendments is because when they wrote the amendments, they weren't very crystal clear about it. So we are left to, figure out what they were trying to say. But that's probably good, because if we had to still go by their standards and their technology and their economy and their lifestyle and their values, then it would be really hard for us to live today. So it's probably a good thing. Good or bad to every situation. So that's basically it. Make sure you look at those court cases before you take the quiz. Okay, see ya.